All right, so welcome everyone to Finding Stillness in the Storm. The tagline here is Ancient Wisdom for Navigating Modern Challenges. You are likely here because you could use some help navigating whatever uncertainty and adversity you might be experiencing in the moment that you're in. You are in the right place if you are open to learning a time-tested and scientifically vetted process for embracing uncertainty and navigating adversity. What you should do next is make sure that, number one, appreciate those of you that are able to be on camera being on camera. Recordings will be available. However, you will not be seen in the recordings as long as you remain muted, because we'll be in presentation mode. And you'll notice that comments are disabled. This is just to prevent any distractions. We'll have an opportunity for everyone to join in and ask questions or ask for implementation advice in the Q&A portion after the presentation. I would recommend, whether you're going to watch the replay or not, that you have something to write on and something to write with, because I'm going to actually encourage you to workshop your way through the process as we go through it together. And what happens next after we're done is, of course, we will go, anyone that wants to stay can go into Q&A and implementation with the Solopreneur Success Circle community of paid subscribers to the Substack. You're all welcome to stay for that portion today. There will be a replay available. I will send it to you through the calendar event. So if you did not put your email in to RSVP for the event, you'll want to do that if you want access to the replay. I'm going to send some resources as well. I'll explain that as we kind of go through the process. And I am totally open to making myself available to anyone that has questions after the presentation and the Q&A session. My email is scott@creativeonpurpose.com. You're welcome, whether you're a paid subscriber or not, as well, to email me if you want additional resources or have questions that you want to ask. So what I would love for you all to do now is, as we're just getting started, I would love for you to please go ahead and, on whatever you're writing on, with whatever you're writing with, I would love for you to just share an answer to this question. How are you feeling right now? And what I would encourage you to do is, you can use 1 to 3 separate words, or just describe it in 3 words, however you want to go about doing that. But I would encourage you to write down how you're feeling right now, and as honestly and authentically as you can do that. I'm not going to ask you to share this answer. Again, my intention with this workshop is to give you a very simple 3-step process to embrace uncertainty and navigate adversity, whatever uncertainty or adversity you're currently facing or engaged in. And I think if you note at the top of what you're experiencing right now, it will be interesting to see how you feel when you're all done workshopping through this process with me. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the situation. Okay, we are, many of us, I suspect those of you that are here are experiencing some sort of unusually intense feelings, emotions around political strife, economic uncertainty, all of this compounded for some of us by natural disaster, social upheaval, what have you. In addition to that, regardless of the universal societal moment that we're in, life is always fraught. There's always going to be moments of challenge, of difficulty. Pain is an inevitable part of life. We're all going to experience pain in our personal lives, in our business development, and so forth. And so, because this group is normally talking about solopreneurship and challenges and goal achievement around independent business ownership, whether that's online or in person or brick and mortar, we all know as solopreneurs that is also a fraught enterprise, and that we encounter uncertainty and adversity daily in our businesses. And so the question is, what do we do? What do we do knowing that challenge is inevitable, difficulty is inevitable, pain is inevitable? Well, the solution is, in very simple terms, using one of my favorite metaphors, is you have to learn how to become the thermostat instead of being the thermometer. And what I mean by that is, thermometers react to the temperature in the room. When it's really hot, the thermometer reacts by turning more red. Thermometers are reactive tools. A thermostat sets the temperature of the room. What we want to do as business owners, as people navigating challenges in our day-to-day life, is we want to become more like the thermostat and less like the thermometer, which means that although pain is inevitable, suffering becomes optional. And the way that I think about this is pain is inevitable. We're going to have challenges, pain caused through business challenges, through relationship challenges, through the challenges of just living in neighborhoods or interacting with the world. Suffering happens when we remain attached to whatever emotional reactions we're having about the situation or circumstances we find ourselves. And so with this whole idea of becoming more like the thermostat and less like the thermometer, what we are challenging ourselves to do is to be in control of the things that are within our control and to remain unattached to the things that are not within our control. And another way that I'd like to think about this is we want to become the kind of person that works on and through a problem, as opposed to the kind of person that lets problems work them over. So how do we do this? Well, this is where we get into one of my favorite topics. I know Catherine and probably Lillian and certainly Cato are familiar with my love and affection for Stoic philosophy, and in addition to other ancient spiritual and philosophical traditions. And what we're going to do is we're going to work through a process that comes directly from what are called the three Stoic disciplines. Now, I could talk to you just about Stoic philosophy for the next 3 hours, and I know that nobody came here to be lectured on ancient Hellenistic philosophy. What I do want to do is provide a little bit of context just so that there's no misunderstanding around what we're talking about here. So when I send out the replay, I will send you a resource. If you want to nerd out and noodle, to use Bree's favorite words, if you want to nerd out and noodle on Stoicism, I have some stuff for you, and I will share those links with you when I share the replay. But in general, what you need to know about Stoicism for the purposes of this workshop is that when we talk about Stoicism and what a Stoic is, we're not talking about the common English usage with a small s, which is this idea of chin up, grim determination, persevering grimly and committedly through all of life's challenges. Stoicism as a philosophy with a capital S is an ancient philosophy that comes from the Hellenistic world, started in Greece, moved over to Rome, that begins with the idea that there are a couple things that are true of all humans. We are inherently social creatures, and that we are born with and have the capacity for reason. Doesn't mean that we always act reasonably, because we don't, but we have the capacity to reason. And if we cultivate that capacity for reason and employ our innate creativity in our social engagements and in our engagements throughout the world, that we can increase virtue, which you can think of it as the content of your character. You can develop yourself and become a better person, the kind of person that doesn't get upset and dragged around by their desires or by the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis. And that whatever is happening in your life, in the world, that you can be experiencing a consistent sense of equanimity, cultivating peace of mind, and that you can actually sustain joy through all of life's victories and vicissitudes. Okay, so I'm going to show you a quote in a minute that comes from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. It's the book that I consistently recommend more than any other. And all you need to know about Marcus Aurelius is that he is called the last of the five good Roman emperors. He was a Roman emperor in the 300s AD. And during his reign, he navigated famine, he navigated plague, he navigated a series of natural disasters. He led troops in an endless succession of wars on the borders against the barbarians, and he actually navigated the empire through an attempt at overthrowing his reign. In addition, in his personal life, there was possible marital infidelity. He endured the loss of several children. His son that remained was a difficult character, to say the least, a sociopath, probably, possibly even a psychopath. And Stoicism helped him navigate all of these challenges, the challenges as emperor, the challenges that he faced in navigating the empire through those challenges, and just in his personal life. So Stoicism is one of those enduring ancient philosophies that has really been time tested. And if you have ever been through any kind of therapeutic healing, you probably have worked with someone that has some direct or indirect training in Stoic philosophy. Rational emotive behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, positive psychology, these are all heavily influenced by Stoic philosophy. So this is not something I'm just making up. And it's not some sort of weird woo-woo thing that I'm trying to throw at you or proselytizing. Like I don't consider myself a Stoic. I am a student of Stoicism, and I found Stoic principles and philosophy to be immensely helpful in navigating every challenge I've ever had in life, beginning when I was a preteen, when I was first introduced to Marcus Aurelius's meditations. So before I bring up the quote that we're going to focus on to illustrate the three Stoic disciplines that we're going to use as a foundation for this process for embracing uncertainty and navigating adversity, I would love for you now to try to bring to mind some sort of challenge that you're facing. I would highly recommend that if you are experiencing any kind of intense trauma or challenge that brings very high vibration, highly charged emotions, that you not begin with that kind of challenge. Now, the process can help and has helped people that are navigating deadly diseases and the loss of a loved one and loss of relationships and all sorts of really traumatic things, but it's not the place to begin your practice. So if there is some sort of mild challenge, some frustration, or something that is angering you but is not dragging you around into any kind of a doom spiral, I would encourage you to keep that situation, that challenge in mind, write it down, and we can workshop together in real time. Again, I'm not going to ask anyone to come off mute and share what they're wrestling with. I'm encouraging you to do on your own. It's a way of engaging the field. You're going to learn something by doing something with this thing that I'm going to be talking to you about. So if you have something in mind, I'm going to start by just sharing this quote that comes from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He actually repeats a version of this quote several times throughout his journal. But the quote is, "Objective judgment now at this very moment, unselfish action now at this very moment, willing acceptance now at this very moment of all external events. That's all you need." And what he is saying in this quote is he's reminding himself and reciting to himself the three disciplines of Stoic philosophy. And the three disciplines of Stoic philosophy are very simply the discipline of perception, the discipline of action, and the discipline of will. And so I'm going to stop the share and we'll kind of go through each of these. So objective judgment now at this very moment. This is the discipline of perception. How am I seeing things? The encouragement in the three disciplines of Stoic philosophy, which actually comes from Marcus's favorite Stoic teacher, Epictetus, or Epictetus, depending on how you like to pronounce it. The discipline of perception is about cultivating objectivity and acknowledgement of what is actually happening, what the situation actually is, because it's only through the objective articulation of what's happening that you're going to be able to frame the situation as a solvable problem, as opposed to a highly emotionally charged problem that's dragging you around. Unselfish action now at this very moment, this is the discipline of action. This is a part of the process where you're encouraged to make reasoned choices, to look at your situation and frame all the possible ways that you could respond instead of reacting, and then choosing the response that most aligns with who you are, who you're with, what's going on, and what is the next best step, or to quote Cato and my favorite philosopher from Frozen 2, just do the next right thing. And then the discipline of will, this is the one that's kind of hardest. And one of the things about Stoic philosophy is that it's very easy to understand. You don't need to go to school to learn about Stoicism. It's very pragmatic, practical, and plain, common sense stuff. But the discipline of will is one that sometimes people have difficulty wrapping their head around. And what the discipline of will really is not will in the sense of determination to do something, but it's, to quote again Marcus Aurelius, willing acceptance. This idea of willing acceptance of what is happening, or willing acceptance of the results of your choices and actions. And what willing acceptance gives you is the ability to find peace and purpose in the process, as opposed to clinging to your expectations or desires for results that are beyond your control. So it's also a way, willing acceptance is also a way of cultivating a sense of gratitude and generosity, even as you are facing really difficult challenges. So just to give you a little bit of origin story before we workshop our way through this, whatever example you're using for yourself, the three disciplines of Stoic philosophy, that quote of Marcus Aurelius, I've been chewing on that literally since I was in the 7th grade. And when the pandemic closed down the world and I was around people that were really suffering at the time, I was a head coach at Akimbo workshops. I think I was head coaching 2 different workshops. You know, there were hundreds of students that were already engaged in these things, and the world was shutting down and people were spinning out and people were feeling all the feels. And so what I started doing was I just started doing a version of this workshop, at first within the Akimbo workshops. Then I started doing it with friends and neighbors in Zoom rooms like this. I was approached by my friend Kelly, who leads an organization of military spouses, and we presented this to military bases all over the country. We came up on the radar of the Army College in Gettysburg, who brought us to Arlington, Virginia, and we presented this same training to a room full of spouses to newly minted 1 to 5-star generals. So it's a process that I've been honing for a long time. And I don't know how many people here are military spouses or no military spouses, but nobody is more out of control of their lives than a military spouse. They get picked up and dragged all over the country. Their spouses get taken away for long periods of time. They often have kids. And as we were presenting this material to these groups, the impact was really profound. So again, just providing that context to say, this stuff really works if you do the work. If you take what I'm sharing with you and apply it to your current challenge and any subsequent challenge that you have in your life, over time, you will find yourself being more and more responsive in your life and less reactive, in a way that is just natural, organic, innate, and intuitive. And you will experience this thing that I call equanimity, or I refer to it as equanimity. I get accused of being fond of big fancy words, but equanimity just means that you're acting more like a thermostat than a thermometer. So here's how I would encourage you to work through the process. Take this challenge that you're currently facing, and you're going to ask yourself, I mean, if you want to remember the 3 disciplines of perception, action, and will, that's fine. But here's 3 questions that have helped people that I've worked with workshop their way through a challenge. The 3 questions are: what's now? What's next? What matters? What's now is the question around the discipline of perception. And when you're asking yourself what's now, what I want you to do is write down what is happening now. And when I say write down what is happening now, I mean write down what is happening now without all the adjectives, all the adverbs, all the value judgments, and all the emotionally charged language. I'll give you an example. I've been a freelancer, a solopreneur, for over 30 years. Almost all of my adult life, I have worked by myself for myself. For about 25 of those years, I was primarily making a living as a musician and guitar teacher. If you know anything about freelancing, if you know anything about musicians, here's how it works. You're only making money when you have a gig. As a freelancing musician, I very frequently found myself looking at my calendar and freaking out because I didn't have enough gigs on my calendar to cover the bills that I needed to cover that month. So I would look at my calendar and I'd say, holy crap, I don't have enough gigs. I'm not going to be able to pay my bills. I'm going to lose the house. My wife is going to leave me. My kids are going to hate me. My dog's going to run away. I'm going to end up living in a box under a bridge down by the river. And I'm going to die an alcoholic and drug addict, blah, 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 blah. Like that's in an instant what goes through your brain. That's the human response to a challenge. If I were to apply the discipline of perception and ask the question, what's now, and frame that situation in a way that is objective, that strips away all of the value judgments and all of the adjectives and adverbs, the plain and simple truth is the problem that I need to solve is that I don't have enough gigs on my calendar to cover my bills, period. So when you're framing your situation, answering the question, what's now, through the discipline of perception, if you make sure you strike out all the adjectives and adverbs and all the narrative fallacies and all the cognitive biases that are framing your situation and try to put it into 6 to 10 words, you'll probably come up with something that is reasonably objective and acknowledging the actual situation that is, as opposed to the story that you're telling yourself about the situation as it is. So then you move to the next question. What's next? This is the discipline of action. And what we're doing around this idea of answering the question of what's next is, what are all the actual options available to you in this moment? And I encourage people to literally write down everything, every possible choice that you could make. So I created a workbook when we did this presentation up in Arlington, and I'm just going to pull it up and I'll share my screen so that you can see in this example what I'm talking about. Okay, so ignore the circles and the crossouts right now. If I list as many options as I can think of for my personal example, I can reduce my expenses by canceling online subscriptions and other conveniences. Those of you that have worked with me as one-on-one clients or in the Close the Gap program or are members of the Solopreneur Success Circle community, you know this as recapture and reallocate. David knows this from our mutual friend Nick Peterson and the Guardian Academy. You can actually, before you even think about how am I going to make more money, you can actually go through all of your current spending and probably recapture more than enough money that's being poorly spent, misspent, or just inadvertently misspent to take care of things. Another option is I could get a part-time job. I could explore bankruptcy. I could raise my current prices. I could connect with past clients for new business or referrals. Again, those of you that have worked with me or are part of the community know this is the rear view mirror exercise. It's always best to look at what's worked for you in the past as a way to generate revenue as opposed to creating something brand new. Or I could just give up and go back to teaching. So when we're looking at all of these possible options, and again, if you want to screenshot that, you can. But what I've done next after I've listed everything is I've crossed off anything that doesn't align with my values or that crosses the boundary around what I call my non-negotiables. Okay, so I'm not going to get a part-time job. I've been succeeding as a solopreneur for some time. I've been through hard times before. I can get through them again. I'm not going to distract myself by adding other responsibilities to my already full plate. I'm not going to explore bankruptcy because that's just not something I believe in. And I'm not going to give up and go back to being a school teacher because I would probably rather go through what the Stoics used to call the open door, which was just the Stoics always believe that if you find yourself in an impossible situation, that suicide is actually an option that's worth considering. So I've crossed all those things off. And then I circle all the things that remain as possible choices. And now what I need to do is I need to just take the next right step. So now I look at all the things that are available choices that are acceptable to me. and I prioritize them in order of which one is most likely to solve my problem with the greatest velocity, with the least amount of risk. And of course, you can always combine solutions as well. But in a situation like this, sometimes I would combine things. I would consider raising my prices. I would consider going to my wait list for students. I would consider selling instruments that I wasn't playing anymore. But if I go through those options, again, recapture and reallocate, if I go through my expenses and see which expenses are not really giving me a return on investment, I can simply cancel those investments and recoup that money to help me get through a difficult period. So that's the process of what's next. Taking a reasoned look at all the possible options, taking off the board anything that doesn't align with who you are, and of the remaining options, just taking a reasoned approach to which of these gets me the furthest, the fastest towards solving my problem. Which one provides the most effective and efficient solution to solving the problem that I find myself in? That's going to be your decision. That's the action that you're going to take, which moves us to the final question: what matters? Right? This is the idea, again, of willing acceptance. And so the question to ask yourself here when you are asking what matters is, what matters to you? From a Stoic perspective, from the perspective of Stoic philosophy, what they say matters most is virtue, the content of your character. The Stoics say that all you need to live a good life is to be a good person. And if you pursue becoming a better person every single day, you will experience flourishing in your life. If you look back at that quote from Marcus Aurelius, you'll also notice that he is always talking about now at this very moment. He says objective judgment now at this very moment, unselfish action now at this very moment, willing acceptance now at this very moment. This is an exercise in mindfulness and presence, not turning cycles over regret about what's happened in the past, not spinning cycles of anxiety about your desires and expectations for the future, and not spinning cycles of fear and angst over what's happening right now, being unattached to all those emotional reactions that are impeding your ability to thrive and flourish and make reasoned choices, so that you can be with the actual problem that you're experiencing and come to a reasoned response. And to understand, the Stoics would never frame it this way, but it's definitely in line with the process, is to remember that your decisions are not outcomes. You can make the very best decision possible and get a really lousy outcome. You can make the worst decision possible and get a really great outcome. Neither one of those things really makes sense, but they happen all the time. When we make a bad decision and get a bad outcome, that makes sense. When we make a good decision and get a good outcome, that makes sense. There's no cognitive dissonance. But we can really trip ourselves up and get confused when we make bad decisions and get good outcomes, or good decisions and get bad outcomes. And so this idea of detaching yourself from the results keeps you present and in the process, because the process is the shortcut. The process is the actual reward. And that if consistently you apply the disciplines to framing your situation objectively, making reasoned choices for what you decide and do next, and appreciating and continuing to engage with the process over time, you will consistently find yourself in a better position, making better decisions based on a better framing, seeking more reasonable outcomes, and so forth. So what you're doing through this what matters question is reminding yourself of what actually matters, right? What actually matters is making sure that you remain in a place of presence, in a place of gratitude, in a place of generosity. You don't want to make decisions that might further your desires but impede other people's flourishing or their ability to pursue their desires. And that no matter what, you're going to end up becoming a better person, the kind of person that can make to better frame themselves in their situation and the people around them, make more reasoned choices and continue their pursuit of building better processes that help them become better people, and that over time, continuing to rinse and repeat this process, you will get closer to what you actually want. But no matter what, you're always getting closer to becoming the kind of person that can experience more equanimity, peace of mind, sense of flourishing, despite whatever is happening, whatever might be impeding your abilities. So hopefully you've taken a little bit of time to think about those three questions and answer them as you're applying them to your situation. And what I would encourage you to do, as we're kind of wrapping up the presentation portion, and then you're all welcome to stay for Q&A, is having heard, thought about, and gone through this process with a situation that you're currently finding yourself in, a challenge you're currently navigating. How are you feeling right now? You answered the question, how do I feel now, at the beginning of this workshop? How do you feel now, having thought about and gone through this process? And how does that feeling that you're experiencing now compare to the feeling that you had at the beginning of the workshop? My hope is that if you were feeling more intense emotions at the beginning, that you feel that those are feeling less intense. Again, this is not a life hack. You're not going to like instant equanimity or instant peace of mind. It's a process that if you rinse and repeat and maintain a practice of approaching life's challenges this way, you will experience the compounding effect of trusting a process that helps you learn to trust yourself and earning the confidence that you can be the kind of person that looks at their situation more objectively, makes decisions more rationally, reasonably, and is always paying attention and keeping front of mind what matters most to you. If you did experience a diminishment in negative emotions, or if you did increase your positive feelings, I would encourage you to think about the fact that that is in part not just because of the process, but what we find, the members of the Solopreneur Success Circle that are here, we have a community of people that leverages the force multiplier effect of affiliation. If you put yourself consistently in rooms, people that are on a similar journey, that are in pursuit of becoming better people and building businesses that make them a better living by becoming a better person, then we welcome you to consider investigating the possibility of joining the community. If that's something that interests you, feel free to reach out to me to learn more about how you can join the community and the weekly calls and the monthly coaching sessions. But with that, that's the whole process, and we can move right into Q&A. Happy to begin by just hearing, my intent is always to be helpful and useful. Was that helpful and or useful? 2 nods, 3 nods, 4 nods, a couple thumbs up. That's awesome. Anybody want to share what's most helpful?
So the biggest, I wrote down a few notes of this, but for me, sorry, let me look into my camera. But the biggest takeaway for me was the being the thermostat and not the thermometer. And while it's something that I kind of like know in not so many words, having that language to actually like coherently and concisely describe what the target is, which is being the source of the control versus being reactionary. It's a very nice little container and for that reminder that that we are the ones that are in control. And while we may not be in control of our conditions and situation and circumstance, we are certainly the ones that are in control of how we respond to it. And if we need to change the temperature, we can do that. So that was my biggest takeaway.
I really appreciate that reflection, David. It reminds me a little bit of, I think it was on yesterday's community call, we were talking about the 3 sins of solopreneurship, which we borrow from Dr. Jeff's 3 sins, which are dull, distracted, and delusional, which is things that we all experience as individuals, as human beings, because of our programming and conditioning. The antidote to the three sins of solopreneurship are the three virtues of solopreneurship, which are receptivity, restraint, and responsibility. And I think you really spoke well to that idea. And that's an important part of the three disciplines of Stoic philosophy. A big part of it is what is called the Stoic fork, which comes from Epictetus, which is the opening line of the Enchiridion, his handbook, which says some things are within our control and others are not. What's within your control is how you see things and what you decide to do next, discipline of perception and action. What's outside of your control? Everything else. Can't control other people, can't control the environment or what's happening in the natural world. You can't control what's happening in society. You can't even really control what's happening to your body. I mean, disease and plague and old age, like these are just things that are going to happen. It's beyond your control. It doesn't mean that you can't influence better results by taking care of what's yours to take care of. But ultimately, there's a lot of freedom that comes from remaining detached or unattached to anything that's outside of your control and paying attention to the two things that are perception and action. Anybody else? We also have several healers that are part of our community: Kat, Dr. Bree, Sandra, Clay. I don't know if any of this resonates with any of the practices that you teach around navigating challenge or boosting peace of mind, but would also love to have you add additional perspective, or if you have a insight or additional practice that can help someone navigate challenging times, open to having you share.
Hey, Scott, it's Clay. I thought what you said, you encapsulated really well when you went through the exercise of, what's now and what's next. I was working with a guy the other day, and of course, I work with people that are on the extreme end of the spectrum of mental health, but he was just really spiraling into thinking about things that had happened to him and thinking that this small action that someone else did was going to turn into this like a snowball, rolling downhill effect. And that's some of the exactly kind of thing. And like I said, I thought you encapsulated really well. What I was communicating to him was what's the reality of what's going on right now. And I think that's really good. It's a really good practice for any of us to remember, because it's so easy, like you said, to get caught up in, like it's the country song, right? Everything that could go wrong went wrong. But what is happening right now? Well, none of that stuff's happening right now. I'm okay. I think that's a great exercise. I think that you encapsulated really well.
Well, I really appreciate that. It also reminds me of the opening of Nick Peterson's book Bumpers. And if anybody's interested in that book, I can get you a free digital copy. Just send me a message. I'll get it to you. But one of his practices is appreciating when bad things don't happen. Right? Like we celebrate, maybe in your world, the prisoner that turns his life around and never ends up back, but we don't celebrate the person that never got themselves in trouble in the first place. I am guilty of having people celebrate me losing the same 30 pounds over and over and over again. But my wife is never celebrated for having never gained 30 pounds in the first place. So it's a great share. Anybody else? I appreciate the comments that are coming in too.
You'll be happy to know, Scott, that I'm back. I actually have comments to make.
Oh, she's back to her normal self. We were so worried about you.
Well, we won't even get into that right now, but there's been like a major shift. Anyway, I do have to preface though with you connected the dots for me on, I've always wondered why I was so able to just problem solve calmly, because anything that's happening on whatever level, if I'm going to fall apart, I don't fall apart till after the problem solved, if I'm going to fall apart at all. And it was my 10 years as an Army wife when I was a very young woman that I learned the skills. I mean, you connected those dots in a huge way for me with that. So thank you. But that said, Buddha also said the root of all suffering is attachment. And, so the philosophies that come from Stoicism spread out in many different directions. And I absolutely would say that everything in that process is part of nervous system regulation. And, which is the lens of focus that I work through. But one thing I think I would add to it is it's really important for everybody to understand where the tipping point of their personal nervous system is, because we all have a different level of tolerance. And what I've noticed this last few days with many of the people that I'm connected to, as Clay just said about one particular individual, I've noticed a collective difference between those that were spiraling, and some of the folks have really, really spiraled, and the others who have been just strangely calm. They're not happy, they're angry, they've got all kinds of feelings going through, but they're not spiraling. And so as I've been witnessing this, I've been asking, why is that? And the why of it is in part where, their tipping point of their nervous system is, because I'm certain that even the people that weren't spiraling there would be a straw that broke the camel's back in terms of their nervous system tolerance, and then they would begin to spiral. But the reason why those folks had a broader level or a more expanded level of nervous system tolerance is because they have skills like this, and they're able to stay somewhat non-attached. I think the other thing that has been happening is the demographic of people that I'm connected to that have been able to not spiral are the ones that have been able to take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to take care of myself for a few days. And I'm going to take a deep breath, and I'm going to let this settle. And then I'm going to come back to deciding what I need to do next. And, I could go on all day about this, and I've already been writing about it and, that sort of thing. But I think there's a direct correlation to what you're teaching and to, the nervous system, and everybody's nervous system is different because there's so much complexity that goes into making up what your particular nervous or any particular individual's nervous system can and cannot tolerate. And there are, I wrote this morning about how this is very parallel to everything we're feeling at the start of the pandemic. It's bringing up really old emotions of shock and stun and helplessness and all of that sort of thing for many people. And the fact that we're bringing up body knowledge right now in how we're feeling has to be acknowledged and dealt with. And, I had immediately people, yep, I was thinking just that. I've been thinking that in the last 24 hours. Yep. So anyway, for what it's worth, that's my 2 cents right now.
Yeah. Well, that was more like 5 cents, but we always appreciate your contributions to the cause. There's a couple things that you said.
I have time to make up for when I was silent all those weeks.
Oh, I know you built up some equity in your long silence. There's a couple things that you said that I think are really powerful and worth highlighting. The first is that, yes, we are all born with different temperaments and tolerances around how we handle uncertainty and adversity. And we can also learn and earn the skill to be better managers of our system. And you referenced Buddhism, which is another interest of mine, along with Taoism and Hinduism, along with Stoicism and other Western philosophies. But one of the things that's really unique about all of these ancient spiritual and philosophical systems is that they all kind of arose at the same time in all the four corners of the world, probably corners that were not communicating at all with each other. And what's interesting about all these enduring spiritual and philosophical traditions is that the things that they got right have to do with ethics and emotions and managing life's big questions. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be happy? How can I be more of both? And so I'm a big fan of learning from and stealing from any tradition that has something to teach. And again, a lot of this informs many modern practices, whether they overtly talk about it or not. That's why I say the system that I taught you today is time tested. It's literally been tested and employed by all sorts of people in all sorts of domains, navigating all sorts of challenges. One of the examples I cite most often is Viktor Frankl navigating his internment in multiple Nazi death camps during World War II, during the Holocaust. As a student of Stoicism, he retained his humanity and maintained his equanimity as he helped his fellow inmates endure and navigate their way through a horrific human experience. And he exited that situation, become as a better, stronger human who created a psychological approach that's called logos therapy, that is also one of those therapeutic disciplines that endures and continues through more modern practices. I have no evidence that Anne Frank was a Stoic, but when you read Anne Frank's diary and look at what she was saying as she was enduring kind of a self-imposed imprisonment, it's astounding. But this is like literally the promise of employing these kind of ancient philosophical and spiritual approaches. Is you can literally flourish through the worst things that you can imagine happening to a human. That was a great share. Anybody else?
What really came through for me in the talk was just that simple term presence, which Scott raised. When we come back to presence, then all the other external stuff wafts away. The worry about things that happened in the past, the anxiety of like, how am I going to work things out in the future of things that I want to do? And then the phrase that really came for me, which I always bring in, is training yourself to being comfortable with being uncomfortable. That gets you on the other side, because things are always changing. One master I studied with, he said, the one thing you can count on, Sandra, is change. It's the one consistent thing in life. And so Kate referred to, assessing where your nervous system is at. Like if we have the tools to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, then we're always in a place of being able to respond rather than react, be the thermostat rather than the thermometer.
Yeah.
So if everyone's game, I'd bring in some tools, though I'd like Bree to go first, if not, that's okay too.
Let's do it. Go ahead, Bree, and then we'll come back to Sandra.
Sure. Yes, this was so fabulous. Just want to share that I feel like this gave me a lot of focus in my own business and what I need to be doing next. I also wanted to say I love the connection with, it's basically, this is cognitive behavioral strategies, and I think they're so powerful and important. The thought management piece, looking at where we're at, acceptance as well is so powerful. And I just wanted to add some additional, in addition to thought management, thinking about grounding techniques, movement, if you can exercise it in some way, it can be helpful. Healthy distractions. I was trying to come up with a list, but that's what I've got right now. Oh, yes, nerding out about something too. Creativity.
Nerding out, noodling, always Always helpful. Yeah. And I before we kick it back to Sandra, I love that I've used that terminology myself in the past. I don't remember where I stole it from, but this idea of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. When I've done this presentation, I remember Kelly and I were doing this with a group of military spouses, and literally, even though we said, whatever you do, don't focus on a immediate traumatic event that you're experiencing. And of course, someone pops on mic and says, I just got diagnosed with terminal cancer, and my husband, like, it was like, oh my God. And her question was, how the hell am I supposed to achieve equanimity when I'm dying and my husband left me and I'm in financial dire straits, and I didn't have an immediate response to that other than to say there are these times in our life, and everybody has again, we have different temperaments and tolerances, but there are these moments in our life where the only upside is the opportunity to practice acceptance, patience, surrender, and hope to build a skill of resilience, right? So this isn't a panacea. None of this is meant to be a cure-all. And again, this isn't a life hack. I will say that one of my very first clients was someone that, this was before I even really had an official coaching program. They were a former guitar student. And you can imagine what it would be like to sit in a room with me for a half hour trying to learn how to play wagon wheel and me waxing on about life philosophy. But he got a terminal diagnosis, and he was like, I want you to help me come to terms with the fact that I'm dying. And I'm not a therapist, and I don't pretend to be one, and I don't advocate anybody that's not a trained therapist engaging in therapy or a therapeutic practice. But I said, I have no credentials. I just have this stuff that I know. And if it helps you, I'm happy to have this conversation. And his remaining 3 months of life, he said, were amongst his most present and prosperous in terms of just his feeling of being alive and connected to himself, to his loved ones, to his life in general. So again, just a test, like, this is powerful stuff that works because it's always worked. Doesn't mean it's always going to work, but we keep talking about this stuff because it's endured for a long time. All right, Sandra, why don't you take us home with some additional practices?
So you're all welcome to participate if you like. We're going to do it all from seating. The one thing I was going to share before, well, two things. One's a story. One's, if you find that you are having challenges being the thermostat instead of the thermometer, I just want to share with all of you that it's not your fault. So don't beat yourself up. Don't, drag yourself over the coals because you're not getting to this, you're not doing this. There are so many reasons why that is happening, and it truly is not your fault. And I'm not going to go into all that stuff because we're going to be the thing by doing the thing. The other thing is to share a story. I had a session with a man who was terminally diagnosed with cancer. He was given 3 months to live. And at the beginning of the session, he was distraught, in pieces, in bits. I mean, he couldn't get a word out with me without breaking out and bawling. By the end of the session, with some of the things that I'm about to share, he had a smile on his face, he felt at peace, and he felt, using those tools in the next few weeks, he was able to make decisions about whether or not he was going to go with certain treatments or not, and make decisions that he really needed to get in order for his family because he was no longer going to be with them. So just very simple. Bring these in if you want to be the thermostat instead of the thermometer. From seated, place your feet flat on the floor. And all I want you to do is feel all the parts of your feet that are connecting to the ground. So all we're doing here is reacquainting ourselves with that ground beneath our feet and remembering that it's there. When you're doing it from seated, you're also going to feel into the bum bones of the seat of your chair, because those also become grounding points. Anything that we're touching becomes an extension of us. The next thing you're going to do is extend nice and tall through the spine. And we're just going to draw a nice breath in through the nose. Relax the mouth and the jaw so we're not cranking. Just relax the mouth and the jaw and just let your exhalation flow out of the body. Just nice and easy. Breath in through the nose. Jaw and mouth relax open. And as the exhalation flows with ease out of the body, imagine that it carries with it whatever stresses, tensions, or holdings that your body is able to let go of at this time. The third thing we can bring in, and this will be the most effective for changing from that thermometer to a thermostat, is letting the shoulders relax. And as you breathe in, just let the arms float up. Your fingertips point towards each other to form what we call the mountain. And as you breathe out, the palms push down towards the ground. That's with the exhale. And I'll just demonstrate that once more. Breathing in, shoulders relax, arms float. And as you exhale, just let those palms move towards the ground. Now, what you can bring in with that move, it's called pulling down the heavens, is that thermometer. If you can imagine that whatever it is that you want to switch out of, whether it's fear, anxiety, overexcitedness, confusion, trying to make a decision and you start whirling in that overwhelm and thinking too much, if you can give that a color or a feeling, and as you breathe out, imagine that that is leaving the body and the calmness and the clarity that you want is being filled with what you are bringing in here. So this is the clarity, the calm, the tranquility, the peace. Breathing out the fear, the anxiety. You can watch the thermometer, imagine that it's moving down through your body, through the feet, and into the ground. And that's it.
Awesome. That is a fabulous way to end the session. You can write down on your little sheet of paper, how do you feel now? Fantastic. So I will be dropping the replay and links to learn more about Stoic philosophy if that's something that interests you in a follow-up, probably sometime tomorrow after I edit and enhance the recording. But I deeply appreciate the gift of your time and attention. I hope that this was all really helpful and useful. But most of all, if it was helpful and useful, I hope that you'll practice it in your day-to-day lives, personal, private, business, professional, etc. And I hope you all have a fabulous week, and I'll see some of you on Monday.